Notebook of Doom. Chomp of the Meat-Eating Vegetables. Chapter 1. Rack Attack! Are you ready for a surprise? Asked Alexander's dad, putting on an apron. Alexander watched his dad chop a stalk of celery. That depends, said Alexander. Does it involve vegetables? Sort of, said his dad. You've been saying how strange the food is at school, so I decided could start making your lunches at home. Alexander thought about the weird meal they served at Stermont Elementary. Alexander smiled. Thanks, Dad. Now, why don't you clear off the breakfast table while I finish up here, said his dad. As Alexander was putting the milk away, he noticed a flyer stuck to the refrigerator door. Chow down at the Stermont Elementary. Where? Your new school. Still under construction. Why? To raise money so we can finish the job. When? Friday night. Kids are the waiters. They serve the adults. Hey, neat, said Alexander. This chilly supper sounds. He paused. Something suddenly felt wrong. He looked around the kitchen. The coat rack. He thought. It definitely wasn't here yesterday. It seemed to loom over his father. Some people may see a new coat rack and think nothing of it. But not Alexander Bopp. After moving to Stermont, he had learned two things. 1. His new town was full of monsters. 2. Everyday items like coat racks could turn out to be monsters. Alexander tiptoed up to the coat rack. Coats and hats? A perfect disguise, thought Alexander. But wait! Just to be sure, I'll look in the notebook. Alexander pulled an old notebook out of his backpack. He had found it on his first day in Stermont. It was filled with monster drawings. He flipped it open. Stick figure. Super skinny monster that disguises itself as a flagpole, fishing rod, walking stick, etc. Habitat, rooms with high ceilings. Diet, beef jerky and banana taffy, twisted into a long rope. Peck, stick figures, peck. Hate woodpeckers. Behavior, these guys love to limbo. Warning! Stick figures can't stand water. A single drop scares them away. All right, kiddo. Time to dash. Alexander's dad turned to see his son leap from the counter, screaming a battle cry and snapping a wet dish towel at the coat rack. Alexander landed upside down in a pile of coats. The rack was still standing. Ah, said Alexander's dad. You noticed our new coat rack. He helped Alexander to his feet. I got it yesterday when I went shopping, for this. He handed Alexander a brand new lunch box, fully packed. Thanks, Dad, said Alexander. His dad winked. You bet. Now, get to school, he said. I'll pick up these coats. Chapter 2, A Snack for Stella. Alexander hopped down his front steps. A girl in a hoodie waved to him from the sidewalk. Hey there, Salamander, she called. Salamander was Alexander's nickname. His teacher had called him that on his first day of school, and it stuck. Hi, Nikki, said Alexander. He walked over to her, swinging his new lunch box. Nikki leaned in. Any SSMP news to report? She whispered. SSMP stood for Super Secret Monster Patrol. The SSMP was a group of kids sworn to protect Stermont from monsters. Alexander and Nikki were two of the group's 3 members. Nope, Alexander said. I thought there was a monster in my kitchen, but it was just a coat rack. Nikki nodded. Well, you never know when a big, ugly creature could show up. Hey, weenies, barked a voice. Wait up! A spiky-haired kid ran through somebody's flower bed to catch up with Alexander and Nikki. It was Rip Bonkowski, the third member of the SSMP. Guys, said Rip. Look what happened! He held up a broken skateboard. All four wheels had been mashed flat. Did you throw it off a building? Asked Nikki. Huh? No, said Rip. Something super heavy must have mashed it into the sidewalk. But I'd only stopped for a second to feed her. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Feed who, Rip? Rip pulled a radish from his pocket. It was covered with nibble marks. Stermont Stella, he mumbled. The gopher? Asked Alexander. The one who dove into her hole to hide when those shadow smashers came to Stermont? Yeah, said Rip. His cheeks turned redder than the radish. Those shadow smashers really scared her. I've been stopping by Durwood Park every morning to bring her a snack. She needed a friend, said Nikki. She grinned. The sun sparkled on her braces. Rip, did you actually do something nice for someone? What? No. Stella's just a gopher. Rip threw his radish at Nikki. And anyway, what about my smushed skateboard? Who would do something so mean? Maybe someone who doesn't like gophers, said Alexander, laughing. Now, let's get to school. Chapter 3, Cool School. Every time I come to this school, said Alexander, I feel like I'm about to have my temperature taken. Yeah, said Rip. It's creepy that our school used to be a hospital. Don't be such babies, said Nikki. Anyway, the new school is almost ready. That's why Principal Vanderpants is having the big chili supper, so dash. Bonk! Nikki crashed into the sliding doors. They hadn't slid open like usual. Look! The doors are frozen, said Alexander. Rip grunted as he yanked on the doors, forcing them apart. A big gust of freezing air blasted his face. Alexander, Rip, and Nikki could each see their breath as they walked into the lobby. The walls were white with frost. Grab a coat, shouted a tall man in a parka. He was handing out clothes from the lost and found. Mr. Horsley, said Alexander. Why is it so cold in here? Mr. Horsley was the school secretary, gym coach, bus driver, and nurse. He was also a former member of the SSMP, although he never wanted to talk about it. I'm not sure, said Mr. Horsley. He gave Alexander a sweater and ski goggles. Alexander noticed icicles on the ceiling. He said. This winter wonderland feels like the work of a monster. He pulled out the notebook. Maybe some ice mice, or a chill billy, or even a snomby. Eep, yelped Mr. Horsley, trembling. Put that notebook away. Mr. Horsley handed Nikki a puffy jacket. I don't think this coldness is monster-related, said Nikki, pointing. Look! The air conditioner must be broken. An odd-looking man carrying a toolbox was heading toward the elevator. He wore a dark ski mask and overalls that read Stermont AC Repair. Brrrr, said Rip. Pass me a coat already. Oh, said Mr. Horsley. There's only one left. He tossed Rip a furry black and white snowsuit. I'm not wearing this. Rip shouted. Ripley Bonkowski, said an icy voice. The room grew even colder as an unsmiling woman drifted around the corner. Hi, Principal Vanderpants, said Rip. The air conditioning may be stuck on full blast, she said, but I will not have my students catch cold. You will dress warmly. Rip looked at Alexander. Alexander shrugged. Nicky snorted. Oak away, Rip said, slouching. He pulled on the snowsuit and zipped it up. Perfect, said the principal. You are now the fuzziest, wuzziest panda at Sturmont Elementary. Off to class, you three. Rip started to growl, but it only made him look cuter. Chapter 4, Cry, Cry Again. Alexander wasn't sure he'd ever get used to having class in a Morgan underground room where the hospital would stick dead people. But after several weeks of fighting monsters, a cold, windowless room was no big deal. Alexander swung open the heavy door. At least Mr. Plunkett likes to joke around, he said to Rip and Nicky. Imagine how gloomy our classroom would dash. Wah wah! His teacher sat on his desk, crying into his hands. Boohoo, cried Mr. Plunkett. Take a seat, Alexander. Alexander adjusted his goggles. Every student in the classroom was sobbing, including Rip and Nicky. Are you guys okay? Asked Alexander. He sniffed the air. And, hey, what's that smell? Just sit down, weenie, Rip said between sobs. He stumbled to his seat. Alexander followed Nicky to their table. She wept like a baby. Why are they all crying? He thought. There must be a monster behind this. He opened the notebook to a page speckled with old tear stains. Blubber ducky. Squeak! The blubber duckies. Song makes kids cry. Rub-a-dub run for your life. Behavior, blubber duckies float alongside regular bath-o toys, waiting to be squeezed. Habitat, hot, steamy baths. Diet muddy kids. Warning! Don't squeeze M unless you're ready to become duck chow. To survive, never take a bath. Alexander closed the notebook. Well, blubber duckies aren't making us cry. He said to Nicky. They only hang out in hot baths. It's so cold in here that even my ski goggles fogging up. Alexander gasped. My goggles! He pulled them off. Instantly, his eyes began to sting. Tears rolled down his cheeks. He snapped the goggles back into place. Honk! Mr. Plunkett blew his nose. Since you will be serving the grown-ups at the chili supper this Friday, we will spend the rest of the week studying table manners. You'll all learn how to be polite little waiters. The class cried even louder. That sharp smell, thought Alexander, rubbing his nose. It's so familiar. Nicky, I know that smell, he whispered. It's onions. Chapter 5, Just Dessert. Yes, lunchtime. Alexander called back to Rip and Nicky. He dashed out of the elevator and into the freezing cafeteria. Rip dabbed his eyes with his panda mitten. What's the rush, salamander? There'll just be something yucky on the menu. I came prepared, said Alexander, jiggling his lunch box. Good thinking, added Nicky. They stepped up to the menu. Ooh. Sorry, guys, said Alexander. Hope you can choke down your riri fried beans while I'm eating a delicious, homemade lunch. The kitchen door swung open. A tall chef with short legs came out, carrying a wet sponge. Who's that? Asked Alexander. He's not one of the regular cooks. How can you tell when he's all bundled up? Said Nicky. Alexander shrugged. The chef wiped the menu clean. Then he wrote. Alexander's jaw dropped. Sure enough, There were several buckets of ice cream and dozens of toppings, beneath a sign that said "Serve yourself." "Yes," yelled Rip. He gave Nicky a high 10. "Find us a table, Salamander. Nicky and I have some lunch to scoop." Alexander shuffled over to a table and flipped open his lunch box. Behind the note was a peanut butter, carrot, and celery sandwich. It looked like a bunny. Alexander chomped a carrot. Then he shivered, but not because of the cold. The tall chef was glaring at him. Alexander swallowed. The chef ducked behind a counter as a lunch lady stepped into view. She read the new menu, shrugged, and refilled the chocolate sprinkles. Boom! The table shook as Rip slammed down his mountain of ice cream. Rip held his spoon high. "Never again," he said, "will lunch be this good." Then he dug in. Nicky sat down with a sundae of her own. "Something's not right," said Alexander. "I mean, the super cold school? That oniony smell? A new chef? And now ice cream for lunch?" "You're just mad you brought your lunch on the one day they serve ice cream," said Nicky. "Grom! Grom!" She scarfed down her sundae, splashing strawberry sauce everywhere. "Nice table manners, you monster," said Rip. Rip wasn't joking. Nicky actually called a jampire. Alexander and Rip had been surprised to learn that Nicky was a monster. But really, Nicky was more or less a regular girl. She gave Alexander a big